Hello, welcome back to my Midnight Historian channel. Tonight, we're stepping back into the unforgettable world of 1990s America to discover what everyday life was really like for teenagers before smartphones, social media, and constant internet access changed everything. If you enjoy relaxing history stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and join me for many more journeys into the past. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin. Imagine waking up on a school morning in the mid-1990s. There is no buzzing smartphone waiting beside your bed. No endless stream of notifications demanding your attention. And certainly no social media feed to scroll through before breakfast. Instead, an alarm clock with bright red numbers wakes you. And the first sounds you hear are the television in the living room or the radio playing the latest hit songs. Before leaving for school, many teenagers would quickly eat cereal, grab a backpack filled with heavy textbooks, and rush to catch the yellow school bus. Fashion was an important part of teenage identity. Baggy jeans, oversized flannel shirts, denim jackets, colourful baseball caps, and popular sneakers could instantly tell others which trends you followed. Many teenagers copied the styles of famous musicians, actors, or athletes they admired. A trip to the shopping mall wasn't just about buying clothes, it was where trends were discovered and friendships were strengthened. School itself felt very different from today. Classrooms had chalkboards instead of smartboards, and research projects often required trips to the local library rather than a quick online search. Students passed handwritten notes during lessons, hoping teachers wouldn't notice. If someone wanted to ask a classmate out on a date, it usually happened face to face, making every conversation feel more exciting and sometimes a little frightening. Lunchtime was one of the most important parts of the day because it was when friendships grew. Teenagers gathered around cafeteria tables, sharing jokes, talking about music, sports, movies, or weekend plans. Without phones in their hands, conversations lasted much longer, and everyone paid attention to the people sitting beside them. After school, freedom finally began. Some students joined sports teams or clubs, while others hurried home to watch their favourite television shows before heading outside. Neighbourhood streets often filled with teenagers riding bicycles, skateboarding, playing basketball, or simply walking together until sunset. Parents usually expected their children to return home before dark. But during those hours outside, young people enjoyed a sense of independence that many remember fondly today. One of the most popular places for teenagers to meet was the shopping mall. During the 1990s, malls were much more than places to buy clothes. They were social centres where friends gathered for hours without needing a detailed plan. Groups of teenagers wandered through music stores, tried on jackets they had no intention of buying, played arcade games, and shared a large order of fries in the food court. Record stores attracted crowds eager to hear the newest albums, while electronics shops displayed the latest video game, consoles that many could only dream of owning. Every weekend, the mall buzzed with laughter, conversations, and the excitement of seeing familiar faces. Music shaped nearly every part of teenage life. Portable CD players and cassette Walkmans were treasured possessions. Many teenagers spent hours carefully creating mixtapes by recording songs from the radio onto blank cassette tapes. They waited patiently for their favourite songs, hoping the radio host would not interrupt with announcements before the music ended. Giving someone a handmade mixtape was considered thoughtful and personal, often expressing feelings that were difficult to say aloud. Different music styles brought different groups together. Some loved grunge bands with their raw sound and flannel shirts, while others preferred hip-hop, pop, punk, or alternative rock. MTV played a huge role in introducing new artists and music videos, becoming a daily ritual for millions of young viewers. Entertainment extended far beyond music. Friday nights often meant visiting the local movie theatre or renting VHS tapes from a neighbourhood video store. Families and friends walked through long shelves filled with colourful movie boxes, carefully choosing 1 or 2 films before returning home. If the newest movie was already rented, they simply picked something else. There was no streaming service offering thousands of choices with a single click. Video games were equally memorable. Arcades remained busy with flashing lights, loud sound effects, and friendly competition. Teenagers challenged each other in fighting games, racing games, and pinball machines, sometimes spending an entire afternoon with just a handful of coins. At home, consoles like the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and later the Nintendo 64 became the centre of countless weekends, with friends sitting shoulder to shoulder on the living room floor, cheering, laughing, and arguing over whose turn was next. These simple moments created memories that many people still remember decades later. As evening arrived, another familiar ritual began. Teenagers picked up the family telephone, hoping no one else in the house needed to use the line, because most homes had only one landline. Conversations were often interrupted by parents, reminding them that dinner was ready or that someone else was, waiting to make a call. Some spent hours talking with close friends or a boyfriend or girlfriend, while others nervously dialed a classmate's number, secretly hoping that a parent would not answer first. There were no text messages to hide behind, so every conversation required confidence and genuine communication. Weekends felt even more special because they offered endless possibilities. Football, school dances, birthday parties, backyard barbecues, and sleepovers filled the calendar throughout the year. At these sleepovers, teenagers watched horror movies late into the night, played board games, shared secrets, and laughed until sunrise. Disposable cameras captured these moments, but nobody saw the pictures immediately. They had to wait days, sometimes weeks, before the film was developed, making every photograph feel valuable and exciting. Summer vacation brought an even greater sense of freedom, without social media demanding constant attention. Teenagers spent entire afternoons swimming, riding bikes through neighbourhoods, exploring parks, or simply relaxing on front porches with friends. Parents often had only one rule: be home before dark. That freedom encouraged independence and helped many young people develop confidence by solving small problems on their own. Technology existed, but it never controlled every moment of the day. Personal computers were becoming more common, yet they were usually shared by the whole family. Connecting to the internet required a noisy dial-up modem, and using it often meant nobody else could make a phone call. Web pages loaded slowly, and many teenagers still preferred spending time outdoors rather than waiting for images to appear line by line on the screen. Homework was completed by hand or on simple word processors, and information usually came from books, encyclopedias, or teachers instead of search engines. Looking back today, many people remember the 1990s not because life was perfect, but because it felt slower, simpler, and more personal. Friendships were built through face-to-face conversations. Memories were created without worrying about taking the perfect photo. And every day carried a sense of discovery that did not depend on a screen. It was a decade where patience, imagination, and real human connection quietly shaped an entire generation. The 1990s also marked a unique moment in entertainment, when television brought families together instead of separating them into different rooms. Every week, teenagers eagerly waited for new episodes of their favourite sitcoms, cartoons, or dramas. Missing an episode often meant waiting months for a rerun, so everyone tried to be home on time. Friday evenings were especially exciting because they signalled the beginning of the weekend. Pizza deliveries, bowls of popcorn, and a rented movie from the local video store became part of a familiar routine, shared by millions of families across America. Sports also played an enormous role in teenage culture. Basketball courts, football fields, baseball diamonds, and skate parks were filled every afternoon. The success of athletes like Michael Jordan inspired countless teenagers to practice for hours, dreaming that one day they might become professional stars themselves. Even those who never played competitively often wore the jerseys and sneakers of their favourite teams, turning sports into an important part of everyday fashion. School events created memories that lasted a lifetime. Pep rallies filled gymnasiums with music and school spirit, while homecoming games and prom dances became milestones that many teenagers anticipated for years. Students carefully chose their outfits, decorated gym halls, and nervously asked each other to attend these events together, long before digital invitations and online event pages. Everything spread through conversations in hallways, handwritten posters, and simple word of mouth. Cars represented another powerful symbol of teenage freedom. Earning a driver's license was one of the biggest milestones in a young person's life. Many spent months saving money from part-time jobs to buy an old used car that wasn't particularly fast or stylish, but it represented independence. Cruising through town with friends, windows rolled down and music playing loudly from cassette or CD players became one of the defining experiences of the decade. Fast food restaurants stayed busy on Friday and Saturday nights as groups, gathered after football games or movies, talking for hours over burgers, fries, and milkshakes. Despite the excitement, life in the 1990s was not without challenges. Teenagers still worried about exams, friendships, family expectations, and their future careers. Bullying existed. Heartbreak felt just as painful, and fitting in could sometimes seem impossible. The difference was that most of those struggles remained within schools and neighbourhoods instead of following teenagers home through social media. Every hour of the day, home became a place where many could truly disconnect, reflect, and begin again the next morning. For many Americans who experienced those years firsthand, the memories are filled with small details that seem ordinary yet unforgettable. The sound of a dial-up modem connecting to the internet, the smell of a freshly opened CD case, the excitement of finding a handwritten letter in the mailbox, or the joy of hearing friends knock on the front door without sending a message first. Those everyday moments formed the rhythm of teenage life in a decade that now feels surprisingly distant, yet remains deeply cherished by the generation that lived through it. As the decade slowly drew to a close, something remarkable began to appear in American homes. Bulky desktop computers became more common, and the internet quietly started changing the lives of teenagers. Yet it was still a tool rather than a lifestyle. Logging on required patience. The familiar screech of the dial-up modem echoed through the house, and everyone knew that once someone connected to the internet, the family telephone could no longer be used. Parents often reminded their children not to stay online for too long, because phone calls were important, and internet access was expensive in many households. Even so, exploring the early web felt like stepping into a completely new world. Teenagers created simple personal websites, joined chat rooms, and sent emails that sometimes took several minutes to write despite containing only a few sentences. Instant messaging services became popular toward the end of the decade, allowing friends to continue conversations after school without talking on the phone. Still, these digital experiences occupied only a small part of everyday life. Most friendships continued to grow in classrooms, sports fields, shopping malls, and neighbourhood streets. Family life also looked different. Dinner was often a shared event where everyone gathered around the same table. The television remained turned off during meals in many homes, giving parents and children time to discuss school, weekend plans, or upcoming vacations. Chores were completed before entertainment, and many teenagers balanced homework with responsibilities like mowing the lawn, washing dishes, or helping younger brothers and sisters. These routines may have seemed ordinary, but they helped create strong family traditions that many people remember with affection. Holidays brought neighbourhoods to life. Halloween filled the streets with costumes, and laughter as children and teenagers knocked on doors carrying plastic, pumpkins overflowing with candy. Thanksgiving gathered relatives from across the country around large dinner tables, while Christmas transformed homes with colourful lights, decorated trees, and carefully wrapped presents. Winter break offered precious days away from school, often spent watching holiday movies, playing board games, or visiting grandparents. Looking back today, the teenage experience of the 1990s represents the final years, before the digital revolution completely transformed everyday life. It was a generation that learned to be independent without GPS, built lasting friendships without social media, entertained themselves without endless streaming services, and created memories that existed not in cloud storage but in family photo albums, handwritten notes, and the stories they continue to tell decades later. Another unforgettable part of growing up in the 1990s was learning responsibility through small everyday jobs. Many teenagers earned their first paycheck by delivering newspapers, mowing neighbours' lawns, babysitting, working at grocery stores, movie theatres, or fast food restaurants. The money they earned often went towards saving for a first car, buying new clothes, purchasing the latest CD, or paying for a ticket to an upcoming concert. Receiving that first paycheck created a deep sense of pride because it represented independence and the beginning of adulthood. Education was also changing during this period, but classrooms still relied heavily on traditional methods. Teachers handed out printed worksheets. Students wrote essays with pens or typed them on simple computers. And presentations often involved large poster boards instead of digital slides. Libraries remained essential places for research. Students spent hours searching through shelves of encyclopedias and reference books, carefully copying information into notebooks before returning home to complete assignments. It required patience, but many later remembered these quiet afternoons in the library with surprising affection. Communication with distant friends and relatives felt much more intentional than it does today. Letters were still mailed across the country. Birthday cards arrived through the postal service. And long distance phone calls were often saved for special occasions because they could be expensive. Waiting for a reply taught patience, and every letter carried a personal touch that electronic messages rarely matched. Even simple events, like receiving a postcard from a family member on vacation, brought genuine excitement. Popular culture constantly influenced teenage conversations. New blockbuster movies filled theatres every summer, while television commercials introduced toys, snacks, and fashion trends that quickly spread through schools. Comic books, magazines, and catalogues remained common in many households, giving teenagers something to read while relaxing in their bedrooms or during long family road trips. Without endless digital entertainment, imagination filled the gaps. Friends invented games, explored nearby woods, built treehouses, or simply sat together talking for hours about dreams, music, sports, and what the future might hold. As the year 2000 approached, excitement mixed with uncertainty. News programs discussed the coming millennium, and many people wondered how technology would shape the future. Teenagers could hardly imagine that within only a few years, mobile phones would become pocket-sized computers, social media would connect billions of people, and streaming services would replace video rental stores. The world they knew was about to change forever. Looking back now, the 1990s stand as a bridge between two eras, one rooted in face-to-face conversations, handwritten notes, neighbourhood adventures, and simple routines, and another driven by constant digital connection. That unique balance is exactly why so many people still remember the decade with warmth, nostalgia, and a quiet smile. As high school graduation approached, excitement and uncertainty filled the minds of many teenagers. Graduation Day was more than a ceremony. It marked the end of childhood and the beginning of an unknown future. Families packed school gymnasiums and football stadiums, proudly watching graduates walk across the stage wearing colourful caps and gowns. Disposable cameras flashed from every direction as parents tried to capture memories that would later fill family photo albums. Friends promised to stay in touch forever, signing yearbooks with handwritten messages, inside jokes, and hopeful wishes for the years ahead. Few realised that many of those signatures would become treasured reminders of friendships formed before social media made staying connected almost effortless. For those heading to college, the transition felt both exciting and intimidating. Dorm rooms became new homes, and meeting complete strangers quickly turned them into lifelong friends. Others entered the workforce immediately, joining family businesses, learning skilled trades, or beginning careers in offices, factories, and local companies. Whatever path they chose, the lessons learned during their teenage years followed them into adulthood. Respect, patience, face-to-face communication, and independence had been developed through everyday experiences, rather than digital interactions. Family vacations were another unforgettable part of life during the decade. Long road trips stretched across America's highways, with station wagons and minivans packed full of luggage, snacks, and restless children asking the familiar question, "Are we there yet?" Paper maps rested on the passengers' lap because satellite navigation had not yet become common. If a family became lost, they stopped at a gas station to ask for directions instead of relying on a smartphone. Those unexpected detours often became the funniest stories told years later. National parks, beaches, amusement parks, and roadside attractions welcomed millions of visitors every summer, creating memories that lasted a lifetime. Even the smallest details of everyday life now feel like symbols of another era. The sound of a pencil sharpener in a classroom, the click of a cassette tape locking into place, the smell of freshly printed magazines, and the excitement of hearing the ice cream truck approaching down the street all formed part of the rhythm of the 1990s. These ordinary experiences rarely seemed important at the time, yet they became some of the strongest memories people carried into adulthood. Perhaps that is why the decade continues to inspire such powerful nostalgia. It reminds people of a time when life moved at a gentler pace, when conversations happened without distractions, when friendships grew through shared experiences instead of online profiles, and when the greatest adventures often began with nothing more than a bicycle, a few close friends, and an entire afternoon waiting to be explored. Looking back from today's fast-moving world, the teenage years of the 1990s seem almost timeless, a final chapter of an age balanced perfectly between the familiar traditions of the past and the extraordinary technological future that was just beginning to appear on the horizon. By the end of the 1990s, teenagers had unknowingly experienced the closing chapter of a unique generation. They had grown up in a world where patience was part of everyday life. If they wanted to hear a favourite song, they waited for it on the radio. If they wanted to watch a movie, they visited a video rental store. If they wanted to meet friends, they knocked on the front door instead of sending a message. These simple routines required time, but they also made every experience feel more meaningful. Looking back today, many adults remember that waiting was not an inconvenience. It was simply how life worked, and perhaps it made exciting moments even more rewarding. Technology continued to improve, but it had not yet taken over every quiet moment. Bedrooms were filled with posters of favourite bands, athletes, and movie stars instead of glowing screens. Shelves held stacks of CDs, cassette tapes, books, comic books, and magazines collected over many years. Every object seemed to tell a story, reminding teenagers of a concert they attended, a birthday gift from a friend, or a memorable family vacation. Even today, opening an old box in the attic and discovering these items can instantly bring back emotions that had been forgotten for decades. Communities also felt closely connected. Neighbours often knew each other by name, Children played together outside until sunset, and local events brought families together throughout the year. School sports games attracted large crowds. Community festivals filled parks with music and food, and churches or neighbourhood centres organised activities that encouraged friendships across different ages. For many teenagers, these places became the foundation of lifelong memories and lasting relationships. As historians look back on the decade, they often describe the 1990s as a bridge between two worlds. One foot remained firmly planted in traditional life, where conversations happened face to face and entertainment required imagination. The other stepped cautiously into a rapidly changing future, filled with personal computers, mobile versace. Teenagers living through those years rarely noticed the transformation happening around them because change arrived gradually, one invention at a time. Today, when people remember being a teenager in 1990s America, they often speak less about famous events and more about ordinary moments. They remember riding bicycles with no destination, laughing with friends at the local mall, listening to music late at night through headphones, staying up to watch a favourite television show, and feeling that an endless future still stretched out before them. Those quiet, everyday experiences became the true history of a generation, proving that sometimes the most ordinary days become the most extraordinary memories of all. As the calendar turned from 1999 to 2000, millions of American teenagers gathered with friends and family to celebrate the arrival of a new millennium. There was excitement in the air unlike anything they had experienced before. Fireworks lit up the night sky. Televisions counted down the final seconds of the century, and people wondered what the future would bring. Some even worried about the famous Y2K computer problem, fearing that airplanes, banks, and power systems might suddenly stop working when the date changed. In the end, very little happened, but the event became one of the most memorable moments of the era and marked the symbolic end of the 1990 Sekunde. Within only a few years, the world around those teenagers began changing at an incredible pace. Mobile phones became smaller and more affordable. The internet spread into nearly every home, and search engines made finding information almost instant. Music slowly shifted from CDs to digital files, while video rental stores, that had once been packed every weekend, started losing customers. Shopping malls, once the heart of teenage social life, became quieter as online shopping grew more popular. Without realizing it, an entire way of life was disappearing. Many adults who were teenagers during the 1990s often describe themselves as the last generation to experience a truly offline childhood. They remember making mistakes that were never recorded online, spending entire summers without taking a single photograph, and building friendships that depended on trust rather than social media followers. Their happiest memories were usually simple ones: playing basketball until the streetlights came on, laughing around a campfire, sharing headphones with a best friend, or taking long drives with music playing through the car speakers. Looking back today, historians see the 1990s as a remarkable period of balance. It was modern enough to introduce exciting new technology, yet traditional enough to preserve slower routines and stronger face-to-face relationships. Teenagers learned patience because not everything happened instantly. They learned conversation because there were no screens to hide behind. They learned independence because they solved everyday problems on their own, often with nothing more than a map, a bicycle, and a little curiosity. Perhaps that is why the decade continues to fascinate so many people around the world. It reminds us that history is not only shaped by presidents, wars, or groundbreaking inventions. It is also created by ordinary mornings before school, afternoons spent with friends, family dinners around the table, first jobs, first loves, and quiet evenings that seemed unimportant at the time but later became unforgettable memories. Those ordinary moments formed the heartbeat of teenage life in 1990s. America, leaving behind a legacy of nostalgia that continues to inspire new generations decades later. Of course, the story of the 1990s does not end when the decade itself ends. Its influence can still be seen in modern American culture. Fashion designers continue to bring back oversized jeans, colourful windbreakers, vintage sneakers, and flannel shirts that first became popular during those years. Music from the decade is played on radio stations across the country, while films and television series set in the 1990s introduce younger generations to a world they never experienced themselves. What was once considered ordinary has now become nostalgic, reminding millions of people of a simpler chapter in their lives. Museums and historians often focus on great political events or technological breakthroughs, but the everyday lives of ordinary teenagers are equally important. They reveal how an entire generation thought, communicated, and dreamed. A school locker covered with stickers, a well-worn backpack, a stack of handwritten notes, or an old yearbook may appear insignificant at first glance. Yet these simple objects tell powerful stories about growing up in a rapidly changing world. Future historians may learn just as much from these personal memories as they do from official documents. The friendships formed during the decade also proved remarkably strong. Many classmates who graduated in the late 1990s still organise reunions decades later. They laugh about embarrassing hairstyles, unforgettable teachers, school dull games, and long afternoons spent wandering through shopping malls with little money but endless enthusiasm. When they meet again, conversations often begin exactly where they left off years earlier, showing how deeply those shared experiences shaped their lives. Parents who were once teenagers in the 1990s now tell their own children's stories that sound almost unbelievable. They describe memorizing phone numbers instead of saving contacts, waiting patiently beside a cassette recorder to capture a favourite song from the radio, using paper maps on family vacations, and spending entire weekends outdoors without anyone knowing their exact location. Younger generations, raised with smartphones and high-speed internet, often find these stories surprising, yet they offer a valuable reminder that happiness does not always depend on advanced technology. Minways, the decade represented the final moment before digital life became constant. It was a time when silence was normal, boredom encouraged creativity, and people discovered entertainment by exploring the world around them rather than looking at a screen. Those experiences taught resilience, curiosity, and genuine human connection. Although the world has changed dramatically since then, the memories of teenage life in 1990s America continue to remind us that some of life's greatest moments are often the simplest ones shared. Laughter with close friends, quiet evenings with family, and ordinary days that slowly become extraordinary memories with the passing of time. The memories of growing up in the 1990s continue to influence the people who lived through them. Even decades later, many adults say they can instantly return to those years simply by hearing the opening notes of an old song or catching the familiar scent of a video rental store, a new magazine, or fresh popcorn in a movie theatre. Nostalgia is a powerful feeling, but it is more than just remembering the past. It is remembering how life felt before the world became constantly connected. During those years, free time truly belonged to the individual. A quiet afternoon could pass without a single interruption, allowing teenagers to read a book, practice a hobby, ride a bicycle through the neighbourhood, or simply sit outside watching the sunset. The hobbies of the decade reflected that slower pace of life. Some teenagers collected baseball cards, comic books, stamps, or coins. Others learned to play musical instruments, built model airplanes, sketched in notebooks, or spent weekends fishing with their parents. Creativity often grew from boredom, because entertainment was not available at the touch of a screen. When friends gathered together, they invented games, shared stories, or simply enjoyed each other's company. Looking back, many people believe these moments helped develop stronger imaginations and closer friendships. The relationship between teenagers and their parents was also shaped by the technology of the time. Parents usually expected children to tell them where they were going before leaving the house, because there was no easy way to reach them afterward. Once a teenager rode away on a bicycle or left with friends, parents simply trusted that they would return home safely before the agreed time. That trust encouraged responsibility from an early age. It also gave young people a sense of freedom that many remember as one of the greatest gifts of their childhood. Schools encouraged participation in clubs, music programs, sports teams, and community service projects. Students often stayed after class to rehearse for school plays, practice with marching bands, prepare science fair projects, or compete in debate competitions. These activities created lifelong friendships and taught valuable lessons about teamwork, leadership, and perseverance. Success was celebrated, not with online posts or viral videos, but through applause from classmates, proud parents, and local newspaper articles. Although the 1990s are often remembered as a peaceful and optimistic decade, they also prepared an entire generation for the rapid changes that would soon transform the world. Those teenagers became adults just as smartphones, broadband internet, social media, and digital entertainment reshaped nearly every aspect of daily life. Because they experience both worlds, they understand the value of each. They appreciate modern technology while still remembering a time when conversations happened without distractions. Memories were stored in photo albums instead of cloud servers, and the greatest adventures often began simply by stepping outside the front door with a few close friends, and an entire day waiting to unfold. As time continued to pass, the children and teenagers of the 1990s slowly became parents, teachers, business owners, artists, engineers, and community leaders. Yet no matter where life took them, many carried the values they learned during those years. They remembered the importance of looking someone in the eye during a conversation, keeping promises, arriving on time, and enjoying moments without constantly reaching for a device. These habits were shaped, not by special lessons, but by the ordinary rhythm of daily life. Today, many parents try to recreate pieces of that childhood for their own children. They encourage family board game nights, weekend camping trips, bicycle rides through the neighbourhood, and evenings without phones or tablets. They hope the next generation can experience the same simple joys that once filled their own teenage years. Although the world has changed beyond recognition, the desire for genuine friendship, meaningful conversations, and unforgettable memories has remained exactly the same. Historians often remind us that every generation believes its childhood was unique, but the teenagers of the 1990s truly stood at a remarkable turning point in history. They were among the last young people to spend most of their lives disconnected from the internet, while also becoming the first adults to fully embrace the digital age. Because of this, they understand both worlds in a way that few other generations can. When people speak fondly about the 1990s, they are rarely talking about expensive possessions or extraordinary events. Instead, they remember the laughter shared during school lunches, the excitement of Friday evenings, the freedom of long summer afternoons, and the comfort of knowing that friends would simply knock on the front door instead of sending a message. Those ordinary experiences became the true treasures of the decade. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson this journey through 1990s America leaves behind. History is not only written in famous speeches, political decisions, or technological inventions. It is also written in everyday routines, quiet conversations, family traditions, and the memories that millions of ordinary people carry with them throughout their lives. Sometimes the simplest moments, almost invisible at the time, become the stories that future generations cherish the most. As we reach the final chapters of this journey, it becomes clear that the 1990s were not remembered simply because they came before the internet age. They are remembered because they encouraged people to slow down and truly experience the world around them. Teenagers learned about friendship by spending hours together instead of exchanging short messages. They learned patience by waiting for opportunities rather than expecting instant results. They discovered new places by exploring neighbourhoods, parks, forests, and small-town streets instead of following directions on a digital map. Even celebrations carried a different feeling. Birthday parties were filled with homemade cakes, colourful balloons, board games, and laughter that echoed through living rooms. Families gathered around large dining tables for holidays, sharing stories that had been told many times before but never seemed to lose their charm. During long summer evenings, neighbours sat on front porches, talking while children chased fireflies across quiet yards. These scenes may sound ordinary today, yet they formed the heart of everyday American life. Throughout much of the decade, the schools of the 1990s also left lasting impressions on those who attended them. Hallways decorated with lockers, school newspapers printed on paper, announcements made over loudspeakers, and crowded gymnasiums during basketball games all became symbols of a generation. Teachers often inspired students, not only through lessons but through conversations after class, encouraging them to dream about college, careers, and the future. Those personal interactions helped shape lives in ways that could never be measured as technology accelerated. During the following decades, many people began to appreciate what had quietly disappeared: the excitement of receiving a handwritten letter, the anticipation of waiting for vacation photographs to be developed, or the joy of discovering a favourite song unexpectedly playing on the radio. Gradually became rare experiences. Convenience replaced anticipation, and speed replaced patience. While modern life offers incredible advantages, it also reminds many adults why the slower rhythm of the 1990s still holds such a special place in their memories. Perhaps that is why documentaries, books, and conversations about the decade continue to attract so much attention. They remind us that history is not only about dramatic moments that changed nations, it is also about ordinary mornings, familiar streets, school friendships, family traditions, and countless small experiences that quietly shaped millions of lives. The teenagers of 1990s. America could never have imagined how rapidly the world would transform after they grew up. Yet the values they carried forward, kindness, resilience, curiosity, and genuine human connection, remain just as meaningful today as they were all those years ago. There is another reason why the teenage years of the 1990s continue to capture the imagination of historians and storytellers. It was one of the last decades in which memories were created without the expectation that every moment needed to be photographed or shared with the world. A funny joke between friends existed only in the memories of those who heard it. A perfect summer sunset was admired in silence rather than recorded for an online audience. School dancer, football victories, road trips, and family celebrations became treasured because people experienced them fully in the moment. Looking back, many adults now believe those experiences felt more personal, precisely because they were not constantly interrupted by technology. The homes of the 1990s also reflected a different pace of life. Living rooms were often arranged around a television set that brought the entire family together for evening programs. Shelves held collections of VHS movies, music CDs, family photo albums, and favourite books. Children learned how to rewind videotapes before returning them to the rental store, and many families kept calendars hanging on the kitchen wall to remember birthdays, appointments, and school events. The refrigerator door was usually covered with magnets, report cards, handwritten notes, and vacation photographs, creating a small collection of family history that grew year after year. Seasonal traditions added their own special rhythm to life. Autumn brought football games, colourful leaves, and Halloween decorations appearing across neighbourhoods. Winter arrived with holiday music, school vacations, warm fireplaces, and evenings spent watching classic movies together. Spring meant baseball season, school field trips, and the excitement of graduation approaching once again. Summer opened the door to long vacations, camping trips, amusement parks, county fairs, and endless afternoons outdoors. Every season carried its own unique memories, giving the year a comforting sense of routine that many people still miss today. Perhaps the greatest gift of growing up during the 1990s was learning that happiness could often be found in simple things. A bicycle ride with friends, an afternoon at the local arcade, a favourite song playing on the radio. An unexpected visit from a neighbour could easily become the highlight of an entire week. Those moments required no expensive technology and no worldwide audience. They only required time, companionship, and an appreciation for everyday life. As the years continue to pass, the generation that experienced those teenage years carries these memories forward, sharing them with children and grandchildren who know a completely different world. In doing so, they preserve not only the history of a decade, but also the timeless reminder that life's most meaningful moments are often the quiet ones, the conversations, adventures, and ordinary days that seem small while they are happening, yet grow more valuable with every passing year. Even decades later, researchers who study everyday life often point to the 1990s as one of the final periods when local communities played the greatest role in shaping a teenager's identity. Schools, neighbourhoods, churches, sports clubs, libraries, and community centres were the places where friendships formed and life lessons were learned. Teenagers became known not by online profiles or follow accounts, but by their personalities, talents, and reputations within the people who actually knew them. A student might be remembered as the best basketball player, the funniest classmate, the most talented musician, or simply the person who was always willing to help others. Those reputations were built slowly, through real experiences, rather than digital impressions. Libraries were especially important during this time. They were quiet places where students completed homework, discovered new authors, and explored subjects that sparked their curiosity. Walking through rows of books encouraged exploration in a way that internet searches rarely do today. Someone looking for information about ancient Egypt might accidentally discover books about Rome, Greece, astronomy, or world exploration simply because they were sitting on the same shelf. In many ways, learning was filled with unexpected discoveries that expanded young minds beyond the original question they had hoped to answer. Community events also created unforgettable memories. County fairs brought together families from surrounding towns with carnival rides, live music, homemade food, and local competitions. Independence Day celebrations filled parks with fireworks while neighbours spread blankets across the grass to watch the colourful displays. During winter, many towns organised Christmas parades where marching bands, decorated floats, and local volunteers filled the streets with holiday spirit. These traditions strengthened the feeling that everyone belonged to something larger than themselves. Looking back, one of the greatest strengths of the decade was balance. Technology certainly existed, but it remained a helpful tool instead of becoming the centre of daily life. Teenagers could enjoy video games for an afternoon and then spend the rest of the evening riding bicycles or playing basketball with friends. They listened to music through headphones while still paying attention to the world around them. Entertainment and real life existed side by side instead of competing for attention. Every waking moment. Perhaps that balance explains why so many documentaries, books, and conversations continue to celebrate the 1990s. It was not a perfect decade, and those who lived through it faced many of the same worries that young people experience today. Yet it offered something increasingly rare in the modern world: uninterrupted time to build friendships, discover personal interests, make mistakes without permanent records, and simply grow up at a natural pace. Those experiences quietly shaped an entire generation, leaving behind memories that remain vivid not because they were extraordinary, but because they were real. One final aspect of teenage life in the 1990s deserves special attention: the sense of optimism that seemed to define the decade. The Cold War had ended only a few years earlier. The economy was growing through much of the decade, and many families believed the future would offer even greater opportunities for their children. Teenagers grew up hearing adults speak with confidence about college, new careers, and the exciting possibilities that advancing technology would soon create. While every family faced its own challenges, there was a widespread feeling that tomorrow could be even better than today. This optimism influenced the dreams of an entire generation. Some teenagers imagined becoming astronauts, inspired by space exploration and science programs on television. Others dreamed of becoming musicians after watching their favourite artists on MTV, or athletes after seeing legendary performances in basketball, baseball, and football. Many hoped to travel across America after graduation, exploring famous cities like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, or Miami. These dreams were often discussed late at night during sleepovers, road trips, or long conversations on the family telephone, where friends imagined what their lives might look like 10 or 20 years in the future. Interestingly, few of those teenagers could have predicted the world they would eventually inherit. They never imagined carrying powerful computers in their pockets, ordering almost anything online within minutes, or speaking face to face with someone on the opposite side of the planet through a mobile phone. The technology that feels completely ordinary today would have seemed almost unbelievable to many high school students in 1995, yet because they experienced life before and after this transformation, they developed a unique perspective that younger generations may never fully understand. Today, when historians examine the culture of the 1990s, they often conclude that its greatest legacy was not a particular invention, fashion trend, or television show. Instead, it was the balance between progress and simplicity. Teenagers embraced new ideas without allowing technology to replace everyday human experiences. They still spent countless hours outdoors, celebrated birthdays together, supported local sports teams, helped neighbours, and built friendships through shared adventures rather than shared screens. As more years pass, the memories of growing up during the 1990s become increasingly valuable. They remind us that history is not only found in museums, government archives, or famous landmarks. It also lives in ordinary neighbourhoods, school hallways, family kitchens, shopping malls, playgrounds, and quiet suburban streets where millions of teenagers laughed, learned, dreamed, and slowly became the adults who would help shape the 21st century. Those everyday moments may have seemed small at the time, but together they created one of the most memorable generations in modern American history. As the years continue to move forward, the generation that once filled the classrooms of the 1990s has become the generation telling stories about those unforgettable days. Parents now smile as they explain to their children what it was like to grow up without smartphones, wireless earbuds, or social media. Younger people often find it difficult to imagine waiting several minutes for a computer to connect to the internet, or spending an entire evening hoping a favourite song would finally play on the radio. Yet for those who lived through that era, these experiences were completely normal. They were simply part of everyday life. Many former teenagers have kept small souvenirs from those years. Old yearbooks sit on bookshelves, their pages filled with handwritten messages from classmates who promised to stay friends forever. Boxes stored in attics still contain concert tickets, movie stubs, cassette tapes, baseball cards, photographs, and letters tied together with faded ribbons. None of these objects are valuable because of their price. Instead, they serve as tiny time capsules, preserving memories that instantly transport people back to another chapter of their lives. Even the sounds of the decade remain unforgettable. The click of a cassette player, the whirring of a VHS tape being rewound, the cheerful start-up sound of an early home computer, and the familiar ringing of a landline telephone are enough to awaken memories that have rested quietly for decades. These simple sounds once filled homes every day, yet today they have become reminders of a world that has almost disappeared. The places that defined teenage life have changed as well. Many neighbourhood video rental stores have closed their doors forever. Arcades that once echoed with flashing lights and excited voices have become rare. Some shopping malls have been replaced by offices or apartments, while others stand much quieter than they did during their busiest years. Time has transformed these familiar places, but in the memories of those who visited them as teenagers, they remain exactly as they were, full of friends, laughter, music, and endless possibilities. Perhaps that is one of history's greatest lessons. Buildings may change, technology may advance, and entire generations may grow older, but the emotions connected to meaningful moments often remain untouched. The excitement of a first school dance, the nervousness before asking someone on a date, the pride of earning a first paycheck, or the joy of driving with friends on a warm summer evening never truly disappears. Those feelings become part of who we are, quietly shaping our lives long after the decade itself has faded into history. And so, the story of teenage life in 1990s. America is not simply a story about old technology or changing fashion. It is the story of millions of ordinary, young people discovering who they were during a remarkable moment-real time balanced between the familiar traditions of the 20th century and the extraordinary, Innovations that would soon redefine the 21st. Their experiences remind us that every generation leaves behind its own unique chapter, filled with simple moments that become priceless only after enough time has passed. Eventually, every generation reaches a moment when it realizes that the world of its childhood has quietly become history. For the teenagers of the 1990s, that realization often comes unexpectedly. It might happen while hearing an old song in a supermarket, discovering a dusty photo album in a closet, or driving past a building that was once a favourite arcade or video rental store. In an instant memory with clarity, they remember the friends they laughed with, the teachers who encouraged them, the dreams they carried, and the ordinary afternoons that somehow became unforgettable. Perhaps that is why the history of everyday life deserves to be preserved alongside the stories of famous leaders and great historical events. The experiences of ordinary teenagers reveal how an entire generation truly lived. They remind us that history is not only created in government, buildings or on battlefields. It is also written in classrooms, family kitchens, neighbourhood streets, shopping malls, school buses, and quiet conversations between close friends. The teenagers of the 1990s witnessed the closing years of one era and the beginning of another. They experienced childhood before the digital revolution and adulthood as technology transformed nearly every aspect of modern life. Because of this, they became a bridge between two very different worlds, carrying memories of both into the future. Today, those memories continue to inspire documentaries, books, films, and conversations because they represent something timeless. They remind us that genuine happiness often comes from simple experiences, sharing a meal with family, laughing with friends, exploring the neighbourhood, listening to music, or watching the sunset without feeling the need to capture every second. Those quiet moments, almost invisible while they were happening, became the memories people treasured most. And as we gently close this journey through teenage life in 1990s, America, we are left with one lasting thought. Every generation believes its ordinary days will last forever. Yet time quietly turns today's routines into tomorrow's history. The bicycles, cassette tapes, school lockers, shopping malls, handwritten notes, and family dinners of the 1990s may belong to the past. But the lessons they taught about friendship, kindness, patience, and living in the moment remain as valuable today as they were decades ago. That is the true legacy of growing up in America during one of the most unforgettable decades of the 20th century. Even though the decade has become part of history, its influence continues to appear in surprising ways. Modern fashion frequently borrows styles from the 1990s. Musicians sample songs from the era, and filmmakers recreate its colourful neighbourhoods, classrooms, and shopping malls to help younger audiences understand what life once felt like. These recreations are more than simple nostalgia. They are reminders that every generation leaves behind a cultural fingerprint that shapes the future in ways people rarely notice at the time. Researchers who study modern society often compare the teenage years of the 1990s with those of today. They point out that young people from that decade generally spent more time outdoors, participated in more face-to-face conversations, and enjoyed greater independence during childhood. While today's technology has brought incredible advantages in communication, education, and entertainment, it has also changed the rhythm of everyday life. The slower pace of the 1990s allowed friendships to develop gradually, hobbies to grow naturally, and family traditions to remain an important part of daily routines. Many former teenagers say that one of the greatest gifts of that era was the ability to be fully present. When friends gathered together, there were few distractions competing for their attention. Conversations lasted for hours. Laughter echoed through neighbourhoods, and memories were created without anyone worrying about taking the perfect photograph. Moments simply happened, and that was enough. Years later, those experiences became some of the most treasured memories of their lives. Perhaps that is why the story of growing up in 1990s America continues to resonate with people around the world. It reminds us that history is not only about inventions or famous events, but also about the simple experiences shared by ordinary people every single day. The school mornings, weekend adventures, first jobs, first friendships, family vacations, and quiet evenings of that remarkable decade became the foundation upon which millions of lives were built. Although the world has changed dramatically since then, the values learned during those years, patience, curiosity, kindness, resilience, and genuine human connection continue to endure, proving that some of the most meaningful parts of history are often found in the ordinary moments that seem small until time transforms them into unforgettable memories. History also has a fascinating way of repeating itself. The teenagers of the 1990s once believed they were living in the most modern time imaginable. They watched computers become common in homes, witnessed the rise of the internet, and saw mobile phones slowly appear in the hands of adults. To them, these inventions felt revolutionary. Yet from today's perspective, those same technologies seem surprisingly simple and even old-fashioned. This reminds us that every generation experiences its own version of the future, only to watch it become part of the past. Another remarkable feature of the decade was the balance between independence and community. Teenagers enjoyed a level of freedom that encouraged confidence. They organised plans without group chats, explored neighbourhoods without GPS, and solved problems without immediately searching for answers online. If they became lost while driving, they unfolded a paper map. If they wanted to learn a new skill, they asked an experienced person, visited the library, or practiced until they improved. Mistakes became valuable teachers because there was no instant solution available at the touch of a button. The pace of life also encouraged people to appreciate anticipation, waiting for a new album to be released, counting the days until a favourite movie reached local theatres, or looking forward to the next weekend gave ordinary life a rhythm that many people now remember with affection. Excitement grew gradually instead of disappearing after a few seconds of scrolling. Even birthdays and holidays seemed to last longer because preparations began weeks in advance, bringing families together through shared traditions and celebrations. Looking back through the eyes of history, it becomes clear that the true treasure of the 1990s was never the fashion, the technology, or even the music. Remarkable as those things were, the greatest treasure was the human connection that existed in everyday life. Friends learned to understand one another through long conversations instead of short messages. Families created memories around dinner tables rather than separate screens. Neighbours recognised each other by name. Children played together until sunset. And communities celebrated important moments side by side. Perhaps that is why so many people continue to look back on the decade with such warmth. It was not because life was easier or without problems, but because many ordinary moments were lived with complete attention. There was time to listen, to explore, time to dream, and time to simply enjoy being together. Those simple experiences became the invisible threads that connected millions of lives, creating memories that have only grown more valuable with every passing year. And in many ways, that may be the greatest lesson the 1990 Sekunden still have to offer the modern world. As we reflect on this remarkable decade, one question naturally comes to mind. Could teenagers growing up today ever experience life in quite the same way? The answer is probably no, not because one generation is better than another, but because every generation is shaped by the world around it. The teenagers of the 1990s belong to a brief moment in history when technology was advancing quickly but had not yet taken control of everyday life. They enjoyed the excitement of new inventions while still living in a world where face-to-face conversations, handwritten notes, and spontaneous adventures remained at the centre of daily life. That unique balance created unforgettable memories. A rainy afternoon might be spent reading a favourite novel, building a model airplane, or listening to an entire music album from beginning to end without interruption. Friends could spend hours talking while sitting on the hood of a parked car, watching the stars appear one by one in the evening sky. There was no pressure to constantly document every moment. Experiences were valuable simply because they were shared with people who mattered. Even the challenges of the decade helped shape stronger character. Waiting in long lines for concert tickets, saving allowance money for months to buy a new bicycle or game console, or working after school to earn extra income taught patience and determination. Success often required consistent effort, and that made every achievement feel deeply rewarding. Whether it was passing an important exam, making the school sports team, or finally purchasing a first car, accomplishments carried a sense of pride that stayed with people for years. The changing seasons also seemed to mark the passage of time more clearly. Each school year brought new teachers, new classmates, and new opportunities. Every summer felt like an endless adventure filled with road trips, camping, swimming pools, county fairs, and evenings spent chasing fireflies or watching fireworks on warm July nights. Autumn returned with football games and colourful leaves, while winter brought holidays that gathered families together around decorated homes and shared traditions. These yearly rhythms became the background music of an entire generation's childhood. Today, those who lived through the 1990s often realised that they were witnessing the final years of a slower world without knowing it. They could not have imagined how dramatically everyday life would change within only a decade. Yet perhaps that is exactly what makes their memories so meaningful. They remind us that history is not only about remarkable inventions or world-changing events. Sometimes it is about ordinary people living ordinary lives, creating moments of kindness, friendship, laughter, and hope that quietly become the most precious memories of all. Yet perhaps the most fascinating truth about growing up in the 1990s is that nobody living through those years realised they were experiencing the end of an era. Teenagers did not wake up thinking they were witnessing history. To them, every school day, every weekend with friends, every family vacation, and every birthday felt completely ordinary. They had no way of knowing that only a few years later the world would become connected by smartphones, high-speed internet, and social media, forever changing the rhythm of everyday life. Because of this, many memories from the decade feel especially authentic. There was no pressure to create the perfect photograph or record every exciting moment. A family picnic remained a family picnic. A school dance remained a memory shared only by those who attended. A summer afternoon spent riding bicycles through quiet neighbourhoods existed only in the minds of the friends who experienced it together. Ironically, because so little was documented, those memories often became even more meaningful as time passed. The decade also encouraged curiosity in simple ways. Teenagers explored bookstores looking for novels that caught their attention. They wandered through museums during school field trips, discovering subjects they had never considered before. Weekend visits to science centres, zoos, and historical landmarks inspired many young people to dream about future careers. Curiosity grew, naturally, because entertainment was not available every second of the day. Moments of boredom often became opportunities to learn something unexpected. Teachers frequently played an important role beyond the classroom. Many stayed after school to coach sports teams, supervise clubs, or simply listen to students who needed advice. Coaches encouraged discipline and teamwork. Music teachers inspired creativity, and librarians introduced young readers to books that would remain favourites for the rest of their lives. These relationships quietly shaped countless futures, proving that the influence of a caring adult often lasts far beyond graduation. As the first decade of the 21st century unfolded, the pace of change accelerated faster than anyone had imagined. Broadband internet replaced dial-up connections. DVDs gradually replaced VHS tapes. MP3 players changed the music industry. And mobile phones became smaller, smarter, and more affordable. Within only a few years, the daily routines that had defined teenage life throughout the 1990s began disappearing one after another. Shopping malls became less crowded. Video rental stores slowly closed. Handwritten letters became rare. And neighbourhood conversations increasingly moved onto digital screens. Looking back now, historians often describe the 1990s as the last chapter of an analogue childhood and the opening pages of the digital age. It was a generation fortunate enough to remember both worlds. They experienced the excitement of technological progress while still enjoying a childhood built around real conversations, outdoor adventures, patient anticipation, and lasting friendships. Perhaps that is why the decade continues to hold such a special place in so many hearts, reminding us that history is often at its most meaningful when it captures the quiet, ordinary moments that seemed insignificant at the time but later became unforgettable. The lasting influence of the 1990 Sekunde can also be seen in the values that many people carried into adulthood. Those who grew up during the decade often speak about the importance of patience, loyalty, and appreciating small moments. They remember that friendships were built over years of shared experiences rather than quick online conversations. Trust developed naturally because people spent time together in classrooms, neighbourhoods, sports teams, and family gatherings. These relationships often remained strong long after graduation, proving that genuine human connection does not depend on technology. Many traditions that seemed ordinary at the time have now become treasured memories. Families gathered every evening to eat dinner together, discussing the events of the day without phones interrupting the conversation. Children helped clear the table before watching television or finishing homework. Weekend mornings often began with pancakes, cartoons, or trips to local parks. Parents taught practical skills such as fixing bicycles, changing a car tyre, planting a garden, or cooking favourite family recipes. These simple lessons quietly prepared teenagers for adulthood while strengthening family bonds that lasted for decades. Travel during the 1990s also carried a special sense of adventure. Before GPS navigation became common, road trips required careful planning. Paper maps were unfolded across the front seat, and rest stops became opportunities to stretch, enjoy a meal, and ask for directions if necessary. Families visited national parks, historic battlefields, museums, beaches, and small towns along the way. The journey itself often became just as memorable as the destination. Unexpected detours sometimes led to hidden attractions that were never listed in travel guides, creating stories that families continued to tell for years afterward. The workplace also welcomed many teenagers for the first time during these years. Summer jobs taught responsibility, punctuality, and the value of earning money through hard work. Whether serving customers at a restaurant, stocking shelves at a grocery store, lifeguarding at a community pool, or helping at a local business. These early experiences gave young people confidence and independence. They learned how to manage their own income, work as part of a team, and communicate with people of different ages and backgrounds. As historians continue studying everyday life in the late 20th century, they increasingly recognise that the ordinary experiences of teenagers reveal just as much about the era as political speeches or technological inventions. The classrooms, neighbourhoods, shopping malls, family dinners, summer vacations, and first jobs of the 1990s formed the foundation of millions of lives. Together, these seemingly simple moments created a generation that entered the 21st century carrying memories of a slower, more personal world. Those memories continue to remind us that history is often found not only in extraordinary events but also in the quiet routines that shape who we become. Another important part of understanding the 1990s is remembering that America itself was changing. Cities continued to grow, suburbs expanded, and new technology companies began transforming the economy. Yet, for most teenagers, these enormous national changes were almost invisible. Their world remained centered around school, family, close friends, and the familiar places they visited every week. History often unfolds quietly in the background while ordinary people continue living their everyday lives. And the 1990s were a perfect example of that truth. The classrooms of the decade reflected this period of transition. Teachers increasingly introduced students to computers, but handwritten essays, notebooks, and printed textbooks still dominated everyday learning. Computer labs were exciting places where students practiced typing, learned basic software, and explored educational programs that seemed incredibly advanced at the time. Few imagined that within a single generation, nearly every student would one day carry a powerful computer inside a pocket. Environmental awareness also became a growing part of teenage education. Schools organised recycling programs, tree planting events, and Earth Day activities that encouraged students to think about protecting the planet. Science classes discussed endangered animals, pollution, and the importance of conserving natural resources. These lessons inspired many young people to develop a lifelong appreciation for nature, leading families to spend weekends hiking, camping, fishing, or visiting America's magnificent national parks. Books continued to play a major role in entertainment. Before digital reading became common, teenagers regularly borrowed novels from school and public libraries. Mystery stories, science fiction, fantasy adventures, biographies, and historical novels introduced readers to distant worlds and different cultures. Many students discovered a lifelong love of reading simply by wandering through library shelves and choosing a book whose cover caught their attention. Unlike today's personalised recommendations, every discovery felt unexpected and personal. Perhaps the greatest strength of the decade was its ability to combine progress with simplicity. Teenagers welcomed new inventions without allowing them to replace everyday experiences. They embraced computers while still writing letters, enjoyed video games while continuing to play outside, and listened to music through portable CD players while remaining fully aware of the world around them. Technology supported life instead of controlling it. Looking back through the lens of history, the teenage years of the 1990s now appear as a rare and unforgettable moment balanced between two different centuries. It was a time when traditions from the past still shaped everyday life, while the future quietly waited just beyond the horizon. Those who experienced those years became witnesses to one of the greatest cultural transformations in modern history, carrying with them memories of a childhood that can never be repeated, yet whose lessons about friendship, family, curiosity, patience, and appreciating simple moments remain as meaningful today as they were all those years ago. As the memories of the 1990s continue to fade further into history, they become increasingly valuable to historians because they capture the final years of a lifestyle that had existed for generations. It was a time when childhood was measured not by screen time, but by the seasons of the year, school vacations, neighbourhood adventures, and family traditions. The pace of life encouraged people to notice the small details: a colourful sunset after a baseball game, the smell of fresh rain during summer vacation, or the excitement of hearing a favourite song unexpectedly play on the radio while driving home. The decade also reminds that progress does not erase the importance of human connection. Technology has made communication faster than ever before. Yet, the strongest memories from the 1990s rarely involve machines. Instead, they revolve around conversations, shared laughter, family dinners, school friendships, and simple moments that required nothing more than being present with the people who mattered most. Those experiences taught lessons that remain timeless regardless of how much the world changes. For historians, the true story of the 1990s is not only found in newspapers, government records, or television broadcasts. It is preserved in family photo albums, handwritten yearbooks, old cassette tapes, faded concert tickets, childhood bedrooms, and the stories people continue to tell decades later. Every ordinary object becomes a small piece of history because it represents the daily lives of millions of young people who unknowingly stood at the edge of a new century. Perhaps that is why so many people continue returning to this decade with affection. It reminds us that history is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it unfolds quietly, through everyday routines that seem ordinary while we are living them. Only years later do we realise those ordinary mornings before school, weekend trips with friends, long family road journeys, and peaceful evenings at home were shaping memories that would last a lifetime. And so, the story of being a teenager in 1990s. America becomes more than a story about one country or one decade. It becomes a reminder that every generation experiences a unique chapter that can never be repeated in exactly the same way. Time moves forward, technology evolves, and society changes, but the search for friendship, belonging, purpose, and happiness remains constant. Those timeless hopes connected the teenagers of the 1990s to every generation that came before them and to every generation that will follow in the years still to come. Over time, the teenagers of the 1990s discovered something unexpected. The ordinary experiences they had once taken for granted slowly became extraordinary pieces of history. Walking through a shopping mall with friends on a Saturday afternoon, borrowing books from the local library, spending hours at an arcade, or waiting patiently beside the family telephone for an important call no longer represented everyday life. They became snapshots of a world that future generations would know only through stories, photographs, and documentaries. Karma. This is one of the reasons historians continue studying the decade with such interest. The 1990s marked the closing years of an age, built around physical communities. Local bookstores recommended new novels. Neighbourhood video stores suggested the latest films. And record shops introduced teenagers to artists who would later become legends. Every town had its own favourite gathering places where friendships were strengthened through regular meetings instead of online conversations. These locations became landmarks in people's personal histories, even if they never appeared in history textbooks. The decade also demonstrated that meaningful memories rarely depend on expensive possessions. Many people remember simple evenings sitting around a campfire, watching thunderstorms from a front porch, or driving along quiet country roads with music playing softly through the car speakers. Those peaceful moments often left a deeper impression than the biggest celebrations, because they allowed people to slow down and appreciate the company of those around them. As time moved into the 21st century, technology transformed nearly every part of daily life, bringing remarkable convenience and opportunities. Yet many adults who grew up during the 1990s still look back with gratitude because they experienced a childhood that encouraged patience, curiosity, creativity, and real human interaction before the digital world became permanent. They learned that not every question needed an immediate answer. Not every moment needed to be photographed. And not every silence needed to be filled with noise. Perhaps that is the greatest gift the 1990s left behind. It reminds us that history is made not only by extraordinary events, but also by ordinary people living ordinary lives with kindness, hope, and curiosity. The classrooms, neighbourhoods, shopping malls, family dinners, road trips, and summer evenings of that remarkable decade continue to live on through the memories of those who experienced them. And as those stories are passed from one generation to the next, they preserve far more than nostalgia. They preserve a way of life that quietly shaped millions of people before disappearing into history. Looking back from today, it is easy to understand why so many documentaries, books, and conversations continue to celebrate the experience of growing up in 1990s America. The decade represented a rare balance between tradition and progress. Young people enjoyed modern inventions without becoming completely dependent on them. They embraced the future while still holding onto habits that had connected families and communities for generations. That balance has become increasingly valuable as the pace of life has accelerated. In the decades since, many former teenagers now smile when they remember the excitement of receiving a driver's license, buying a first used car, or taking a late-night drive with close friends, while favourite songs played from a cassette or CD. There was no navigation app suggesting the fastest route. Sometimes the destination hardly mattered at all. The journey itself, filled with conversation, laughter, and music, became the memory that lasted forever. Those quiet drives symbolised a freedom that defined an entire generation. Another unforgettable part of the decade was the importance of local traditions. Friday night football games brought entire towns together. School concerts filled auditoriums with proud families. County fairs offered homemade food, carnival rides, and friendly competitions. Community parades celebrated national holidays, while neighbourhood barbecues introduced children to families who would become lifelong friends. These events strengthened the feeling that everyone belonged to something larger than themselves, creating a sense of community that many people still miss today. As historians continue examining this period, they often conclude that the greatest lesson of the 1990s is surprisingly simple. Progress is important, but the moments people treasure most are usually the ones shared with others. A conversation around the dinner table, a laugh with classmates after school, a summer evening spent watching the stars, or a family vacation filled with unexpected adventures often leaves a deeper mark than the newest technology ever could. Perhaps that is why the Memories of teenage life during the 1990s remain so vivid. They remind us that while the world constantly changes, the things that give life meaning remain remarkably familiar. Friendship, curiosity, family, hope, kindness, and the excitement of discovering the future have connected every generation throughout history. The teenagers of the 1990s experienced those timeless emotions during a unique moment when one century was quietly ending and another was just beginning, leaving behind a story that continues to inspire anyone who wonders what it truly felt like to grow up in that unforgettable decade. Even after all these years, one question continues to appear whenever people remember the 1990s. Was life actually better, or was it simply different? Historians generally agree that every generation experiences both advantages and challenges, unique to its own time. The 1990s were no exception. Teenagers still worried about exams, family expectations, relationships, and their future. They experienced disappointment, uncertainty, and difficult moments just as young people do today. Yet they also lived during a period when daily routines encouraged face-to-face interaction, patience, and a stronger connection with the communities around them. Perhaps this is why memories from the decade often feel so vivid. They are connected not only to places but also to emotions. The smell of fresh-cut grass during summer vacation, the excitement of hearing the school bell ring on the last day before holidays, the feeling of opening a brand new notebook at the beginning of the school year, or the comfort of sitting in the back seat during a long family road trip, all remain deeply rooted in the minds of those who experienced them. These details may seem small, but together they created the atmosphere of an entire generation's youth. The passage of time has also transformed many ordinary objects into historical artifacts. Cassette tapes, floppy disks, disposable cameras, pages, paper maps, and bulky computer monitors now appear in museums or collectors' displays, reminding younger generations how quickly technology can evolve. Items that were once used every day have become symbols of a world that existed only a few decades ago. Their value lies not in their complexity, but in the stories they represent. Looking across history, the teenagers of the 1990s occupied a remarkable position. They remembered life before the internet became essential, yet they were young enough to adapt as the digital age transformed society. They carried the traditions of the 20th century into the opportunities of the 21st, becoming witnesses to one of the fastest periods of technological change in human history. Few generations have experienced such a dramatic shift within their own lifetime. And perhaps that is the quiet beauty of this story. The history of growing up in 1990s America reminds us that every generation unknowingly lives through moments that future historians will one day study with fascination. What feels ordinary today may become extraordinary tomorrow. The simple routines, familiar neighbourhoods, school friendships, and family traditions that shape everyday life are never truly ordinary at all. They are the living threads of history, woven together one day at a time, until they become the memories that define an entire generation. There is one final perspective that historians often emphasize when studying the 1990s. They remind us that history is not only measured by inventions or major events, but also by the everyday routines that quietly shaped millions of lives. For teenagers growing up in America during this decade, those routines included catching the school bus before sunrise, laughing with friends in crowded hallways, spending afternoons practicing sports, finishing homework at the kitchen table, and gathering with family before bedtime. At the time, these moments seemed completely ordinary. Only years later did they become precious memories. The rapid changes that followed the decade made those memories even more meaningful. By the middle of the 2000s, high-speed internet, digital cameras, smartphones, and social media had begun changing the way people communicated, learned, and entertained themselves. Within a surprisingly short period, many of the habits that had defined teenage life throughout the 1990s quietly disappeared. The video rental store closed. Handwritten letters became rare. Music collections moved onto tiny digital devices. And shopping malls slowly lost their role as the centre of teenage social life. Yet the values learned during those years did not disappear. Many adults who grew up in the 1990s continue encouraging their own children to spend time outdoors, read books, play sports, enjoy family meals, and build friendships through real conversations rather than endless messages. They understand that while technology can make life easier, the strongest memories are usually created through shared experiences with other people. Perhaps this is why the decade still inspires such deep affection. It reminds us that progress and simplicity do not have to compete with one another. The greatest moments of life are often found in the balance between them. A bicycle ride through the neighbourhood, an afternoon at the library, a family road trip, or a quiet evening listening to music may appear insignificant while they are happening, but with time they become the stories that define an entire lifetime. As our journey through teenage life in 1990s America continues, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Every generation leaves behind a unique collection of memories, traditions, and experiences that can never be recreated in exactly the same way. The teenagers of the 1990s unknowingly stood at the crossroads between two different worlds, one built on patience, face-to-face friendships, and slower rhythms of daily life, and another driven by constant digital connection. Their story remains an important reminder that while history always moves forward, the lessons of kindness, curiosity, resilience, and genuine human connection never grow old. As we continue exploring this chapter of history, it becomes clear that the greatest difference between the 1990s and today was not simply the technology people used, but the way they experienced time itself. Days often felt longer because attention was rarely divided between dozens of different devices. Teenagers focused on the activity in front of them, whether it was practicing for a school concert, reading a favourite novel, playing basketball until sunset, or helping parents prepare dinner. Life moved at a pace that allowed memories to settle naturally, without the constant pressure of keeping up with an endless stream of information. The neighbourhoods of the decade reflected this slower rhythm. Front porches were places where neighbours stopped to chat after work. Children played games together in nearby streets, and families gathered outside during warm summer evenings. Community members recognised one another, celebrated local achievements, and supported each other during difficult times. These daily interactions created a sense of belonging that shaped how many teenagers understood friendship and responsibility. They learned that communities were built through small acts of kindness repeated over many years. Even rainy days carried their own quiet charm. When outdoor plans were cancelled, teenagers found other ways to entertain themselves. Some built puzzles with their families, others baked cookies, listened to music, read magazines, or spent hours organising collections of photographs, baseball cards, or comic books. Without constant digital distractions, imagination often filled the empty spaces. Boredom was not always something to avoid. It frequently became the beginning of creativity. The changing calendar also gave every part of the year its own identity. The excitement of buying school supplies in late summer, decorating classrooms for holidays, waiting for spring break, or counting down the days until summer vacation, created a rhythm that students looked forward to every year. Those traditions became landmarks in their memories, connecting one season of life to the next. Decades later, even the smell of freshly sharpened pencils or the sight of old school lockers can instantly bring those moments back. When historians describe the final years of the 20th century, they often say the 1990s represented a quiet farewell to a way of growing up that had lasted 4 generations. It was a childhood built on conversation instead of notifications, exploration instead of algorithms, and patience instead of instant results. Although the world has changed dramatically since then, the values learned during those years continue to influence millions of people who carry those memories with them. In Setzenzo, the history of being a teenager in 1990s, America is not just a story about the past. It is also a reminder that the simplest moments of everyday life often become the memories that remain with us the longest, as the story of the 1990s continues to echo through history. It reminds us of something surprisingly simple. Every generation believes its own everyday life is ordinary. Yet, with enough time, those ordinary moments become windows into another age. The teenagers who hurried through American school hallways during the 1990s never imagined that future generations would one day be curious about the music they listened to, the clothes they wore, the games they played, or even the way they spoke to one another. To them, it was simply life. But history has a remarkable way of turning the familiar into something fascinating. The decade also left behind a powerful lesson about adapting to change. Those teenagers witnessed the beginning of a technological revolution, but they did not abandon the values they had learned before it arrived. They carried their appreciation for real conversations, family traditions, neighbourhood friendships, and community life into a rapidly changing world. In many ways, they became the bridge between 2 different centuries, understanding both the slower rhythms of the past and the incredible speed of the future. Looking at old family photographs from the era reveals another important truth. The smiles captured in those pictures rarely depended on expensive possessions or the latest technology. Instead, they reflected birthdays celebrated around kitchen tables, camping trips beneath star-filled skies, afternoons at local baseball fields, graduation ceremonies holiday gatherings, and vacations taken with loved ones. These photographs preserved not only faces, but also the emotions of an entire generation growing up together during a remarkable period of American history. It is also worth remembering that history is shaped by millions of small decisions made every single day. A teacher encouraging a struggling student, a parent helping with homework, friends supporting one another through difficult times, or neighbours lending a helping hand may never appear in history books. Yet these quiet acts of kindness influence lives in ways that can last forever. The 1990s were filled with countless moments like these, reminding us that the true strength of any generation is often found in its everyday compassion, rather than its greatest achievements. As we continue this journey through the memories of teenage life in 1990s America, one message becomes clearer with every passing chapter. The objects, fashions, music, and technology of the decade may eventually belong to museums. But the values that shaped those years remain timeless. Curiosity, friendship, perseverance, laughter, family, and hope continue to connect people across every generation. These qualities ensured that the teenagers of the 1990s left behind far more than nostalgic memories. They left behind a lasting reminder that even the most ordinary days can become extraordinary chapters in the story of human history. Perhaps the greatest legacy of growing up in 1990s America is not found in the technology, the fashion, or even the music that defined the decade. Instead, it lives in the habits and values that millions of teenagers quietly carried into adulthood. They learned that trust was earned over time, that friendships required effort, and that the best conversations often happened without any distractions. These lessons were not taught through special classes or motivational speeches. They developed naturally through everyday life, becoming part of who that generation would eventually become. Looking back, many former teenagers describe the decade as a time when people were more comfortable with silence, waiting in line at a movie theatre, riding the school bus, or sitting beside a window during a family road trip did not automatically lead someone to reach for a screen. Instead, they watched the world passing by, started conversations with friends, or simply allowed their thoughts to wander. Those quiet moments encouraged reflection and imagination, two qualities that are often difficult to find in today's fast-moving digital world. The memories of local communities also remain incredibly strong. Small diners where families gathered after football games, neighbourhood parks filled with children every weekend, family-owned bookstores, independent music shops, and corner grocery stores all helped create a sense of belonging. Even though many of these places have disappeared or changed over the years, they continue to exist in the memories of the people who visited them. Every building, every street, and every familiar face became part of a personal history that cannot be replaced. One of the most remarkable things about history is that it often becomes meaningful only after enough time has passed. The teenagers of the 1990s could never have imagined that one day documentaries would be made about the very lives they considered ordinary. They did not realise that future generations would be curious about how they spent weekends how they made friends, or what it felt like to grow up before smartphones became part of everyday life. Yet those ordinary experiences have now become valuable historical memories, offering a glimpse into a world that longas histórias continue to study the closing years of the 20th century. They increasingly recognise that the true story of the 1990s is not simply one of technological change. It is the story of a generation that experienced the final years of an unplugged childhood while standing on the threshold of the digital age. Their lives remind us that every generation leaves behind more than inventions or headlines. It leaves behind traditions, friendships, family stories, and countless quiet moments that together form the real heartbeat of history, preserving the spirit of an era long after the decade itself has come to an end. The influence of the 1990s reaches far beyond the people who actually grew up during the decade. Today, teachers, filmmakers, writers, historians continue exploring those years because they represent a rare turning point in modern history. It was the final generation to spend most of its childhood without carrying the internet everywhere. Yet it also became the first generation to step confidently into the digital world as young adults. That unique experience gave them perspective unlike any generation before or after. Many adults who were teenagers during the 1990s say they still remember the feeling of genuine anticipation, waiting for a birthday, counting down to a summer vacation, or looking forward to seeing friends after a long school break, made every event feel special. Because information and entertainment were not instantly available. Exciting moments seemed to last longer. The journey toward an experience often became just as meaningful as the experience itself. The decade also reminds us that happiness was often built from routines rather than extraordinary events. A Friday evening pizza with family, a Saturday morning cartoon marathon, an afternoon spent practicing basketball, or all quiet Sunday drive through the countryside could easily become the highlight of the week. These traditions created stability and comfort, giving teenagers a strong sense of belonging. Years later, many people discovered that these ordinary routines had become the memories they cherished the most. Historians often describe this period as one of the last decades when local culture shaped young people's identities more strongly than global trends. Teenagers were influenced by their schools, neighbourhoods, local sports teams, and community traditions, while national television and popular music connected the country. Daily life was still deeply rooted in the places where people actually lived. This created strong community ties that many remember with affection decades later. Perhaps the most meaningful lesson from growing up in 1990s America is that history is never only about dramatic events or famous names. It is also about everyday people living ordinary lives with hope, curiosity, and determination. Every walk to school, every family dinner, every weekend adventure, and every conversation with a close friend quietly contributed to the story of an entire generation. As the years continue to pass, those simple moments become even more valuable because they remind us that the true measure of a life is often found not in extraordinary achievements, but in the countless ordinary experiences that shape our character, strengthen our relationships, and remain in our hearts long after the world around us has changed. As we bring our journey to a close, perhaps the most important thing to remember is that history is not only about kings, presidents, wars, or remarkable inventions. It is also about ordinary people waking up each morning, going to school, laughing with friends, helping their families, dreaming about the future, and slowly growing into the adults they were meant to become. The teenagers of 1990s. America may never have imagined that one day their everyday lives would become the subject of documentaries, books, and conversations around the world. Yet that is exactly what happened. Their ordinary moments became extraordinary because time transformed them into history. The world they knew has changed in countless ways. Shopping malls are quieter. Video rental stores have almost disappeared. Cassette tapes have become collector's items, and the sound of a dial-up modem has faded into memory. Technology has connected billions of people in ways that once seemed impossible. We can now speak with someone on the other side of the planet in seconds, carry libraries inside our pockets, and access more information in a minute than previous generations could find in weeks. These achievements are truly remarkable. Yet they also remind us of something the 1990s quietly understood. That progress is at its best when it strengthens human connection rather than replacing it. For many who lived through that decade, the greatest memories are still the simplest ones. Riding bicycles until the streetlights came on, sitting around a dinner table with family after a long day at school, watching the sunset with friends while music played softly from an old car stereo, laughing so hard that no photograph was needed because everyone knew they would remember the moment forever. These memories have survived not because they were recorded perfectly, but because they were lived completely. Every generation leaves behind its own story. The teenagers of the 1990s left a story filled with curiosity, patience, friendship, and hope. They stood at the edge of a new century without realizing they were witnessing the final days of one way of life and the beginning of another. Their experiences became a bridge between the analog world of the 20th century and the digital age that would shape the future. So, as we gently close this chapter and allow the echoes of the 1990s to fade into the distance, let us remember that the greatest gift history offers is perspective. It reminds us that today's ordinary moments are quietly becoming tomorrow's memories. One day, future generations will look back at our own lives with the same curiosity that we have shown toward the teenagers of the 1990s, and perhaps they will discover the same timeless truth that happiness is often found not in the extraordinary events that make headlines, but in the quiet moments shared with the people we love, the dreams we dare to follow, and the simple days that become unforgettable only after they have gently slipped into history. Thank you for joining me on this peaceful journey through the unforgettable world of 1990s America. Until our next adventure into the past, sleep well, dream peacefully, and remember that every ordinary day You live today is quietly becoming a page in the history of tomorrow.